Hey there, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for joining us on The Great Exchange, a podcast dedicated to looking at the world through gospel glasses. My name is Matthew Halleck, and I am very excited once again to be bringing you a special interview episode on the podcast. And today I am very excited that I am joined by a wonderful guest. It's a man who does a lot for the kingdom of God in Canada. His name is André Schutten, and André is a part of ARPA Canada. That's the Association for Reform Political Action in Canada, and he is the Director of Law and Policy over at ARPA Canada. You can check him out at arpacanada.ca. And André is also a fellow at the Ezra Institute. He's the Fellow of Law and Civil Discourse over there with our friends from the Ezra Institute, who are also a part of the Rebel Network, a podcast network that we are a part of across Canada, which seeks to proclaim the Lordship of Christ over all areas of life. And Andre's joined us to talk about a very concerning piece of legislation. It's actually technically a proposed amendment to the Canadian Criminal Code, and it comes under the title Bill C-6, an act to amend the criminal code in brackets conversion therapy. We will link in the show notes to the bill. That way all our listeners can engage with the actual piece of legislation that is being put before the House and the Senate, our Canadian legislature, this very moment. And we need to be very, very aware of this bill. It is by far one of the most dangerous pieces of legislation ever put before the Canadian government, especially as it concerns Canadians' fundamental rights and freedoms to freedom of conscience, association, to freedom of religion. All sorts of aspects are affected by this proposed amendment to the criminal code in Canada, and I could not think of a better man to have on the program to discuss this issue than André. He's a constitutional lawyer, and we're super excited to have this discussion with him today. So definitely take notes so that we may be equipped to better engage with our civil magistrates on this very important issue. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the discussion. Without further ado, let's talk to André Schutten of ARPA Canada about Bill C-6. André, thanks so much for joining us on The Great Exchange. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
It's good to be on.
Awesome, man. Well, before we get started, maybe you could just, to set the table, tell us a little bit about what ARPA Canada does and what you do as the Director of Law and Policy with ARPA Canada.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So if ARPA Canada stands for the Association for Reformed Political Action, and so that means the Reformed is not like the old political party under Preston Manning. The Reformed refers to the theological tradition, the Reformed Christian theological tradition coming out of the Great Reformation in the 1500s and John Calvin and through a number of different theologians to Abram Kuyper. So it's Kuyperian or Neo-Kuyperian, and it's an association of Reformed Christians for political engagement. And so we have a two-part mission. The first part of the mission is to get Christians, particularly those from the Reformed community, but other Christians as well, engaged in the political process, to be engaged on political issues that we should be concerned about. And then the second part of our mission is to bring a biblical perspective to our civil government. So that's through legal analysis of bills, that's through lobbying, that's through interventions in the courts, and so on. So that's what we do, and my job as the Director of Law and Policy is to kind of manage particularly that second part of the mission, to oversee our submissions to parliamentary committees, our interventions in the courts, to assist with the lobbying, to really do all of the legal analysis on bills and so on that might be very good or very bad, and then to recommend courses of action on that, how to improve bills, or how to how to work to undermine bad bills. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's why I thought you'd be the perfect guy to have onto the program to talk about what falls into the latter category, which are opposing bad bills. And the bill that we're particularly focusing on today, though there is multiple bad bills before the Senate and before our Parliament, we're focused on Bill C-6. So Bill C-6 is an amendment to the Criminal Code of Canada. So maybe you could help our listeners understand what this actually means, where this bill originated, and a little bit of the history in concerning this battle against so-called conversion therapy.
Mm-hmm. So Bill C-6 arose just in the last year and a bit as it's a bill that's called an Act to Amend the Criminal Code Conversion Therapy. So what it's purported to do is to amend the criminal code in order to criminalize conversion therapy. Now, just a few years ago, the Justice Minister, the current Justice Minister, Minister David Matty, said that this was actually a matter for provinces to legislate on because it was more a health matter. Conversion therapy and different types of therapy is supposed to be regulated under health, which is provincial jurisdiction. But now he seems to think that no, in fact, we can use the power of the criminal code, which is the heaviest hammer in the tool shed available to the government, that he can use the criminal code in order to criminalize conversion therapy. The problem in the bill is, what do we mean by conversion therapy? How do we define that term? There's many Christians across the country. There's many people of goodwill on all sides of the political spectrum and of different religions who would say, yes, we can in fact support a ban on conversion therapy, but not this ban on conversion therapy, because this ban bans way more than just conversion therapy. And so when we look at it, the big problem in Bill C-6 is the definition of conversion therapy. I would read it off for you, but it's a huge mouthful. So I don't know how we want to work through that together. But the basic point that's probably worth mentioning right now for your listeners is when we talk about conversion therapy in the mainstream, around the water cooler, over the fence with our neighbors or what have you, most people think about conversion therapy. They think of things like long outdated practices like electrical shock therapy, where homosexual men were electrocuted while looking at homoerotic images in order to try to change them through that dehumanizing, demeaning, and painful method to try to change them from homosexual to heterosexual. Mm-hmm. Those are long outdated practices. They're very rarely, if ever, practiced anymore. But if that's what we're trying to do with Bill C-6, great. Well, in fact, ARPA Canada drafted a bill to do this very thing. We actually put together a draft bill to ban conversion therapy and even presented it to members of the Justice Department for consideration last January. But this bill does way more than that. The definition is much, 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 much broader than that. And really what it comes down to is that it ends up capturing all kinds of helpful types of talk therapy, pastoral counseling, good faith teachings on and discussions regarding conscientious beliefs around sexuality and identity and belonging and ethics and so on, which just makes it, first of all, a sloppy bill. It's not written very well, but then also makes it a dangerous bill when it comes to freedom of expression and the rights of all Canadians, including LGBTQ Canadians, to get full access to the range of helps that are available for people struggling with questions of identity and sexuality.
Well, let's do a little bit more of a deep dive into the definition of conversion therapy, because you're a lawyer. You know that vague law is bad law. It's really, really bad. So not defining what we're talking about is, as you've made mention, very, very dangerous. So can you maybe spend some time, as you said, diving a little bit deeper into what they're actually meaning when they're saying conversion therapy? Because I think from that, we can start to imagine some of the dangerous and real life implications that can come from this law if it were to be passed and put forward as an amendment to the Criminal Code of Canada.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so I'll read it for your readers, and then I'll break it down into its constituent parts. Okay. So,
okay, perfect.
But before I do that, let me just give two brief observations. So first of all, the definition being what it is, it says this is what conversion therapy means in a big blob of text for a definition, and then with that definition they say 4 things are criminalized. So the 4 things that are criminalized is providing conversion therapy to a child, whether that's inside Canada or internationally, so that's criminal. Advertising conversion therapy would be criminal. Profiting from conversion therapy would be criminal, and then also giving conversion therapy to a non-consenting adult would be criminal. So that's the first comment, is that those are the 4 criminal actions should this bill pass into law. The second comment is that when we're talking about criminality, an offense is not just the actual act itself. The actual, if this were to pass, it's not that just the person who's doing the therapy session with the other person. An offense within the criminal code means offense that's contrary to what I've just listed, those 4 things. But it can also include attempts to do that, or being an accessory after the fact in relation to that offense. So let's say somebody on your board at your church finds out that the pastor was doing these kinds of sessions with people within the church, and then he does something to try to make sure that other people don't know about it. Well, that's being an accessory after the fact. Any counseling in relation to that offense as well. So let's say your pastor is going to do some counseling sessions, pastoral counseling sessions on sexual ethics. If you're on the board of directors and you're aware of that, and you even encourage him to do that, then you would also be party to the offense, and you could also be charged. Okay, so what is the definition then itself? Okay, so currently what it says is conversion therapy means a practice, treatment, or service designed to change a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual, to change a person's gender identity or gender expression to cisgender, or to repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior or non-cisgender gender expression. For greater certainty, this definition does not include a practice, treatment, or service that relates to the exploration and development of an integrated personal identity without favoring any particular sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, period. So that big block of text there, let's break it down into its constituent parts. Okay. And feel free to interrupt at any point.
Yeah, no, I'm loving this. Lay the lawyer on me, buddy. Lay the lawyer on me.
All right. So first of all, it says conversion therapy means a practice, treatment, or service. So right there we have a problem. It's a practice. So that means any practice, any treatment, or any service that's designed to do something. So right there we have a problem. Really what we want to say instead is conversion therapy means a coercive practice, or means a therapeutic practice, or even just using the definite article. Conversion therapy means the practice of doing X or Y, right? That would be much more focused. Here it's any practice, it's any treatment, it's any service designed to change somebody. So that's the beginning problem right at the beginning of the definition. Okay, so what's it designed to change? Conversion therapy is something, it's a practice designed to change what? Well, there's 3 things. So, and again, from a legislative drafting perspective, it would have helped if they just did A, B, C here, but instead it's all crammed into one messy paragraph. And so some people actually miss out on exactly what it is that it's prohibiting. Okay, so first thing it's prohibiting, first thing it's changing, that conversion therapy is a treatment that changes what? Well, the first thing is a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual. Okay, so that's the first thing, changing a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual. So that means it's one directional. So if you were to encourage somebody to explore a homosexual orientation, or to explore homosexual erotic thoughts, or to explore homosexual practices or activities, that would be okay, even if that person identifies as straight or heterosexual. That would be okay. That's no problem. The law doesn't touch that, but only in the one direction. Okay, so there's a bit of a problem there. The second thing that it says conversion therapy would cover is a practice designed to change a person's gender identity or gender expression to cisgender. Okay, so that's the next one. So right there we have a problem a little bit in terminology. So the term cisgender, to my knowledge, has never been used in federal law anywhere, not only in the criminal code, but in any other federal law yet. So this is the first time it's being used. And it's not defined. It's not defined here. What does cisgender mean? Well, for your listeners, cisgender means by those who use that term, and it's a relatively new term developed by people that subscribe to a very particular ideology. Cisgender means where your biological sex correlates to your sense of gender in yourself. So somebody whose biological sex is male and they have a sense of their own gender as being male, those two line up, then you're cisgender. Likewise for female, you have a biologically female body and you have a sense that you yourself are female, then that lines up and that makes you cisgender. But if it doesn't line up, then you're not cisgender. You're transgender, or you're in another category. Okay, so again, we have a one-directional definition here. Like if you're trying to change a person's gender identity, so their identity of themselves as a particular gender, or their gender expression, so that's just the way they express themselves to the world, the way they express their gender to the world. So that includes things like clothing and makeup and names, the names that you choose, and hairstyles, and gender expression is very broad. It can cover all kinds of different things. So trying to change that again in one direction towards cisgender would be a problem. And then the definition says conversion therapy means a practice that represses or reduces non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior or non-cisgender gender expression. So these are behavioral things here. So not just who you are as in your orientation or your gender identity, but how you act is also part of this conversion therapy definition. This is a problem because it's actually this aspect, reducing sexual behavior, has never been included in any definition of conversion therapy for any of the professional bodies in North America. Psychological associations and so on do not include the reduction of sexual behavior as part of a definition of conversion therapy. Why? Because psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers and therapists are all the time dealing with behavior, reducing it, changing it, whatever. That's the business that they're in. And so here again, we have a problem because it's only particular behaviors. It's reducing non-heterosexual sexual behaviors. Or non-cisgender gender expressions. Well, again, that's going to be a problem, particularly because it ends up discriminating against the very people they say this bill is supposed to defend. So if I, as a heterosexual man, am struggling with a pornography addiction, or if I'm struggling with a sex addiction, and let's say, well, I'll just leave it at that. But if I'm struggling with that, I have access to therapists and pastoral counselors and other people who can help me with that if I wanted it. An LGBTQ member of the LGBTQ community would not have that access. They would not have, if they're struggling with gay porn, if they're struggling with a sex addiction, if they're struggling with destructive behaviors like having a different sexual partner every weekend, that kind of thing. Again, if they're heterosexual, they would have access to help. If they were homosexual, if they're LGBTQ, then they don't have access to that help. And that's deeply troubling.
Mm-hmm.
The definition doesn't stop there, though. They added this "for greater certainty" clause, which actually doesn't help give much certainty at all. It says, "For greater certainty, this definition does not include a practice, treatment, or service that relates to the exploration and development of an integrated personal identity." So that there, I'm actually, I think I like that. I don't exactly know what an integrated personal identity is, but I think I like the language there because it's a recognition, I think, that we as individual human beings are complex creatures. Again, from a Christian worldview perspective, when Psalm 139 says God knits us together in our mother's womb, he's knitting many different aspects to us there in our mother's womb. We're more than just biological creatures. We're emotional creatures. We're spiritual creatures. We're creatures that have relationships with other people. And then outside of the way we've been created, we've been placed in a certain context. So we are sexual creatures. We are cultural. We are religious. We are familial. We have occupations and so on. And so there's many aspects to my identity that goes well beyond my sexual identity. So I'm glad that there's a recognition that my personal identity is integrated. It's an integrated whole. There's many aspects to it. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I'm a Christian, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a male, I'm a heterosexual person, I am a Canadian, I'm a lawyer, I am, I'm Caucasian, I am, many different things. All of those are aspects of my identity. But the kicker here is the last part of the phrase, and then they add this phrase, without favoring. So conversion therapy is not a practice, treatment, service that relates to the exploration or the development of an integrated personal identity, with this condition, the condition being that you not favor any particular sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Well, that kind of ruins the first part, because now it's saying, well, wait a second, if you're a person who prioritizes one aspect of your integrated personal identity, for myself, that's my identity in Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. If I prioritize that and I shape all of my other identities or all the other aspects of my identity, my cultural identity, my ethnic identity, my occupational identity, my relational identity, if I shape all of those aspects of my identity in the image of Jesus Christ, that I'm a Christian first, and then I'm a heterosexual person. I'm a Christian first, and then I'm a husband. I'm a Christian first, and then I'm a lawyer. I'm a Christian first, and then I'm a Canadian. If I prioritize Jesus Christ and my identity in him, well, then that's a problem with this definition of conversion therapy, because that greater certainty clause does not protect me, and it doesn't protect other people, particularly within the LGBTQ community, who also want to prioritize their identity in Jesus Christ above their particular sexual orientation, their gender identity, or their gender expression. That's a problem. So that's my little rant there.
No, that's
on the definition.
That's so helpful, and it's so helpful to go through that, because I want to focus in on some of the language that is used in there, because in trying to pass this bill by defining conversion therapy in this way, the people who are promoting this bill are begging the question. They're smuggling in their worldview into a definition that then is the predicate to creating a new criminal code that can make Christians in so many different areas offenders of the Criminal Code of Canada, because we have a different worldview. The idea of sexual orientation, and many people have dealt with this. Even ex-gay herself, Rosaria Butterfield, has done so much work on saying, well, sexual orientation is a relatively new term, and it's a Freudian term that's based off of German Romanticism, which says the highest ethic is your internal feelings and compulsions. And biblically speaking, that is absolutely incoherent. There is no such thing as sexual orientation in the biblical worldview. Sure, we have sexual preferences and proclivities, but we are not oriented, our beings are not oriented one way or the other to some sort of sexual act. They're acts that we engage in, preferences and desires that we either act on or don't act on. And what we need to understand is it's not actually a thing in the Christian worldview. So in putting this into law, and I know sexual orientation's already in our law, it's covered under Section 15 of the equality part of the charter there. It's enshrining a religious and ideological view of sexual behavior that is already on its face contra-Christian. And what you've made mention, Andre, you've talked about cisgender. This language is new. It comes from gender deconstructionist, feminist, like radical left-wing theories. And they're just sliding it in to a bill without defining it. And that has radical implications because this view of sexuality, this view of gender expression is intrinsically anti-Christian. So the interesting part is Henry Van Til talks about how culture is religion externalized. And he talks about how, and I know Reverend Dr. Joe Boot has talked a lot about how the laws of a country reflect the religious presuppositions of that country. And right here, this is a perfect example of this coming into play. Why is this so dangerous to Christians? Because it's another religious worldview being enshrined into law that demands that Christians pay obedience to their view of sexual ethics and gender identity. And that's why I wanted to have you on the program, Andre, because this is a dangerous, dangerous thing. And the interesting part is going through the overview of the charter considerations on the Department of Justice's website, they readily recognize that, quote, the bill also potentially engages sections 2A, freedom of religion, 2B, freedom of expression, 6, mobility rights, 7, life and liberty and security of persons, section 8, search and seizure, and 15, equality of the charter. So it's interesting that they're trying to push this amendment when this amendment clearly butts up against so many of the fundamental freedoms that Canadians have, that when we're talking about fundamental freedoms, they're supposed to be rights that Canadians have, and they're not granted by government. That government has to recognize these rights. Unfortunately, that's not the case so much in Canada with the limitations clause. But let's talk a little bit about some of the implications that can come from this law and how it can butt up against some of these charter rights that we see, Andre.
Well, let me first just say I completely agree with your assessment about how religious this bill is, and I'm like your references to what Van Til has said and Dr. Joe Boot has said is bang on. In fact, the preamble to Bill C-6 actually gives this away. So a preamble to a bill is not the law itself, but it does give courts and others, average Canadians, an indication of where is the government, what's driving its thinking and its purposes in passing this bill. And in the preamble, it talks about how it says, whereas conversion therapy causes harm to society because, among other things, it is based on and propagates myths about sexual orientation and gender identity, including the myth that a person's sexual orientation can and ought to be changed. So that's religious language right there. Like they're talking about myths and so on. And right there, you can actually right there challenge it because it says the myth that a person's sexual orientation can change. But if we stop and think about it, what does it take to prove a myth to not be a myth? Well, just one example, right? Like if we said unicorns are mythical creatures, how many unicorns does it take to prove that they're not? Well, just one. You just got to find one horse out there with a horn growing out its head, and you've proved that it's not a myth anymore. And for the record, I'm pretty sure that I've never found a real unicorn. But when it comes to people whose sexual orientation has changed, there's not just one. There's thousands and thousands of people whose sexual orientation has changed. It develops, it grows. It's actually pretty fluid. And again, right here in the preamble, during the committee debate on this bill, they actually tweaked something. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but they tweaked this part of the preamble where they talk about gender identity can and ought to be changed. They dropped the words can, the word can and out of there. So now the preamble says gender identity ought to be changed, that it's a myth that it ought to be changed. But it used to say that gender identity can and ought to be changed. And basically, I think that was an admission. That was an admission that, in fact, gender identity is pretty fluid. I mean, that's what people have said for a long time, is that gender identity is in fact fluid. And now they were saying, well, but you can't change it. Well, you can't have both at the same time.
Yeah.
It's either changing a lot, that there's a fluid element to it, or in which case, why not allow other people to speak into that? Or it's not. It's fixed. So it's actually pretty complicated there.
Yeah. The whole T is predicated on this idea that gender is fluid, and they obviously make a distinction that Christians wouldn't make between gender and sexuality in the way that they do, right? They really make a radical distinction where we say there's more congruity between the two, and God actually expects our sex and gender to align. Now, there's a lot of wiggle room in those joints and stuff like that. We recognize that. That's super important. But the question that I do want to touch on, as I mentioned, the fact that this law and this definition of conversion therapy is recognized by the Justice Department to possibly engage and butt up against a litany. Like, it's not just one, it's several fundamental freedoms that Canadians have within the Charter. So maybe as a lawyer who argues about the Charter, your constitutional lawyer, maybe you can talk a little bit about that and some of the issues that the law just has within the Canadian context.
Yeah, for sure. So let's see here. So first of all, Section 2A, right? So Section 2A of the Charter protects freedom of conscience and freedom of religion. And so definitely Bill C-6 engages those directly. Freedom of conscience for doctors. Let's start with doctors, like on the whole issue of gender identity and gender expression. There are doctors, there are psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, other professionals who engage with people with, especially children with gender dysphoria and so on, who have a conscientious objection to a mere affirmation route. Where some activists are pushing that even at 3 or 4 years old, 5, 6, 7 years old, that children not only should be allowed to, but actually have the capacity to select their own gender, as if a 3-year-old girl knows what it means to be male, for example, or that a 5-year-old boy knows what it means to be female. And so there are conscientious objectors, whether that's religious conscientious objection because of deeply held religious beliefs, or even just medical ethics objections that they believe, there are secular doctors. In fact, there was even an outspoken gay doctor from Quebec who testified at committee on this, saying this is an insane bill because it's conflating too many issues here, and it's making a mess of medical practice when it comes to helping children struggling with gender dysphoria. So right there, big problem. Section 2A, freedom of conscience for professionals. Section 2A, freedom of religion for religious communities, for example, the ability to freely and without threats or coercion from the state to be able to teach a Christian or Judeo-Christian, or even for that matter in our pluralistic society, an Islamic or other view of sexuality and sexual ethics and identity and anthropology. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean that we are created biologically as one of two categories, male or female? What does that mean? What are the implications for our ethics, how we live, how we raise families? What does it mean for sexuality in our marriages, and so on? So that's an issue. Definitely engaged of freedom of religion, and also under freedom of religion is parental rights. So the rights of parents to be able to raise their own children, obviously not in abusive ways, but to be able to raise their children according to their own deeply held religious convictions. That's been long protected in the Charter jurisprudence. That's definitely engaged here too by C6. And then what about 2B, freedom of expression? That includes thought, belief, opinion, and expression. These are hotly contested issues about what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to what are our sexual ethics supposed to be like? What does it mean to be male and female? And how do we engage in this world? And where do we belong? And when we have these deep existential questions about who am I and how should I live? And again, where do I belong? Then that freedom of expression, including freedom of thought, opinion, and belief, includes not only the ability to express those things, but it includes the right to be able to hear those things. So freedom of thought includes my ability to share my thoughts and my ability to hear the thoughts of other people. This bill comes right in between that and says, nope, there's certain thoughts that need to be just kept to people's selves. So those are definitely engaged. And then I think the Section 15 argument, which is the charter right to not be discriminated against, is a very interesting one. And I think the group of individuals in Canada that are most directly impacted in a discriminatory way by Bill C-6 is the very people it's purported to be protecting, and that is people from the LGBTQ community. I have friends, one who has spoken on a lot of shows with me, Jojo Ruba, is one outspoken advocate in this regard, and he's made this point very emphatically, that for him personally and for many other people that we know, people who have had same-sex attraction and but they're still Christian and they want to order their lives according to the Christian sexual ethic, they want to have access to that help. They want to have access to pastors who can counsel them according to a biblical worldview. And this bill removes that option from them. Now, critics from the other side have said, well, no. Like if, consenting adults are able to get the pastoral help that they want, the pastoral advice that they want. But that's not really true, is it? Because as I listed those 4 prohibitions under this bill, if it's illegal, if it's criminal to advertise or promote so-called conversion therapy, air quotes around conversion therapy, and it's illegal to make any sort of money on conversion therapy, including making a salary as a pastor, for example, then that becomes a problem. That means that, sure, maybe a friend of mine might be able to, as a consenting adult, receive pastoral counseling from a Christian pastor around his struggles with same-sex attraction, but he's going to have a really, really hard time finding somebody to help him if the other person, the person on the other side of that conversation, is not allowed to advertise, not allowed to promote, not allowed to make any money on it, and other people aren't allowed to advertise and promote and make any sort of money off of that service. So it's people like my friends who are discriminated the most by a bill like this.
Yeah, and I think it's super important to bring up just how it is, counterintuitive, but the very people that they're seeking to try and help are often the very people that are hurt by the implications of this law. Now, what has become pretty clear to me, and you talked a little bit about it when you talked about anthropology, Christian ethic, all these things, that by conversion therapy, they're basically, with maybe not knowing it, maybe in their total ignorance, banning and criminalizing Christian conversion. Because Christian conversion is a lot bigger and a lot broader. The implications of conversion to Christ and his total rule and lordship over every aspect of our lives is a lot broader than our just personal warm feeling toward Jesus and our desire to go to church on Sunday. It has implications on anthropology, on ethics, on every single aspect of life. And if we're going to be Christians who seek to, as the sinum bonum, the highest good in our life, to live life for God's glory and his honor, seeking to be made into the image of Christ, then what this bill is doing is, maybe it's unintentional, like I said, I don't want to impute motives, they're making Christian conversion and the Christian world and life view and the many implications that come with that illegal in Canada. That's insane. This is, I don't know, you're a lawyer. This has to be, just from me as a layperson looking at it, this has to be one of the most dangerous bills that I've ever seen in Canadian history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're onto something. So I wrote an article for Reform Perspective magazine last summer. It was published last summer, and the title of it is "Are Bans on Conversion Therapy Actually Bans on Religious Conversion in Drag?" And so in order to answer that question, like, are bans on conversion therapy a species of religious conversion bans? I think we have to figure out three things. What's the majority religion in Canada? What is true conversion and how is it brought about in Christianity? And then what conversion therapy bans in Canada are actually proposing to do. So first of all, Canada's established religion is not, as many people think, some form of old-fashioned Christianity. Canada's established religion is secular humanism through and through. There's a lot of people that would identify as Christian who are actually secular humanists. They're not Christians. And I'd say that's the vast majority of Canadians, and certainly within the political and academic and media establishments, those three huge institutions in Canada, so the civil government, the academy across the country, and the mainstream media, all of them are deeply, deeply committed secular humanists. Mm-hmm. And not just secular humanists, they're Gnostic secular humanists.
Yeah.
And I've written another article where I talk about how Caesar is Gnostic and he expects you to be too. That's the thing about Bill C-6 and an amendment to the criminal code. It's one thing for our civil government to be neutrally secular humanist. I don't believe in the myth of neutrality, frankly, but if it was look, our beliefs are secular humanist, but we'll freely allow all kinds of different religious communities to believe their own thing and do their own thing. That would be one thing. But this is using the power of the criminal code, which is, that's a heavy, heavy power. Like if you violate some of these provisions, you're looking at up to 5 years in jail. So Caesar, the civil government, is using the power of the criminal code to compel religious communities, particularly those that are not Gnostic, to adopt Gnostic ideas about what it means to be human and Gnostic ideas about sexuality. That's a really, really big problem.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we're living under a theocracy, but it's a theocracy that claims on the face of it secular, humanistic, atheistic values. So it seems really counterintuitive, but we've had Dr. P. Andrew Sandlin on the program to talk about how everyone's inescapably religious. And that goes back to what we're talking about, that the laws of a society are the outflow of the most deepest held religious convictions of a society. And I think it's brilliant that you bring up the fact that we as Canadians, though we were founded in the context of a Christian world and life view, as you can even go back to Noah Webster, when they talked about religion in the founding of Canada and the United States of America, they didn't have a pluralistic view of religion. Religious liberty was liberty among Christian denominations. Because even if you look at Thomas Hobbes and some of these atheistic kind of Enlightenment philosophers, they even recognized the only one true religion is Christianity. They didn't believe in it, but it was the only. It's really interesting if you get in the historical context that religious freedom as we kind of know it today wouldn't have really meant what they meant back then. But that's beside the point. Let's get into, you made mention, Andre, I'm currently going through the Association for Certified Biblical Counseling course to become a certified biblical counselor, to help people apply the scriptures to the problems that they face in their lives. And that's partly why I want to have you on. How does this hit our daily lives? Like, what does this bill mean if it were to be passed for biblical counselors, Christian parents, Christian institutions that have ethical codes, and just anybody, like you talk about doctors who have conscientious objections? What would this actually mean? Like, if I have somebody before me who wants help glorifying God in their sexuality, Could I, as a certified biblical counselor, say to them, well, here is what Christ says about sexuality and proper sexual ethics? Or in doing that, would I be breaking the law and subject to fine or prison?
So great question, and that's the question that keeps coming up on all of the different talks I've given for groups of various sizes across the country on this bill over the last year. And it's a little difficult to say for sure because this bill hasn't yet been passed into law. And as the Liberal government keeps on reminding us, well, don't worry about it being too vague or whatever. The courts will figure it out for us, which is, small comfort for anyone who's faced with a criminal prosecution. What a lot of people sometimes fail to remember is that unlike a civil suit where, one neighbor sues another neighbor, there's risk involved there. You better be pretty sure of your case before you take somebody to court, because otherwise, if you lose, you got to pay legal costs on the other side. That's not the case with criminal law. If you're criminally charged, even if at the end of the day you're found not guilty by a judge, you still have to bear the cost and the stress and the anxiety and the character assassination that comes with being criminally charged, and all of those costs are your own. You don't get costs even if you win. But that aside, I think that the scenario you just put to me, certified biblical counselor, somebody comes to you looking for help in making Christ and the way He says live your life, making that central for them and helping them to do that, achieve that, even if they are struggling with, let's say, same-sex attraction or same-sex behaviors. What's the implications of this bill if it were law? So a couple of things. Assuming that person is an adult, that adult and you can have that kind of conversation, but you can only have that conversation in the abstract. You wouldn't be allowed to advertise your services. You wouldn't be allowed to charge for that meeting. So if you're a certified counselor, you wouldn't be able to make money in those kinds of meetings. So it'd have to be somehow pro bono, and there's some people that half of their clientele are people struggling with issues of sexuality and identity. But furthermore, the other thing that's worth noting is that with criminal law like this one, it's likely that it's going to be complaint driven. So the first thing is that a criminal change like this is a shot across the bow. It's basically a warning to anyone who's thinking about counseling along a Christian sexual ethic. Say, hey, you keep in mind that's now criminal behavior, and it drives this kind of stuff underground, and it's an attempt to silence a lot of voices that way. But it's going to be complaint driven, and so that too is very, very problematic. So imagine that you have a client. Let's say this passes into law tomorrow, and the next day you have a client that's 19 years old. And you have a great meeting with this person. In fact, you meet with them 7 or 8 or 9 times. They've consented to it and so on. It's going well. This person gets integrated in the church community. But let's say 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, this person has a falling out with the church community, turns his back on the church, and in fact decides to embrace a different type of lifestyle, a lifestyle that's contrary to how God would have him live. And he says, you know what? I remember having this meeting with this guy, this Christian counselor, and he wasn't affirming of the choices that I'm now making. That person would have the power under the criminal code, of course, to use threats and intimidations and report that to the police and file a criminal complaint and say, on this date or in this range of dates, I met with somebody and he practiced conversion therapy on me, and even though I consented, I didn't really feel comfortable, and they could say more or less whatever they wanted, and so there'd always be this threat of prosecution hanging over your head if you're a counselor or a doctor or a pastor or what have you. So that's another just reality that comes out of this.
Yeah. Okay. So I know we're running short on time, but I do want to touch a couple issues because this is really what our listeners, this is going to hit their lives. So we talked about the private intensive application of the word of God to people's sexual lives in that case of the counselor. What would it mean for the general public proclamation of the word of God to a congregation when it comes to preaching from Leviticus, preaching on Romans 1 18 through 32 or 1 Corinthians 6, these texts in scripture that are explicitly against homosexual activity, right? Because we talked about it's an activity and a preference in scripture. It's something that people do and they desire. It's not who they are as people. But anyways, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that one's harder. That one's harder for me to say as a lawyer to say, okay, that would be contrary to Bill C-6. And so my answer is it sounds like I'm sitting on the fence a little bit, but it's because of the vagueness of the bill. And again, that's why we need clarification. So yeah, would a general sermon preached about a Christian sexual ethic, preached to a full auditorium of people, be considered conversion therapy? My guess is probably not. And if I was your defense lawyer, I'd be arguing really, really hard that it doesn't meet the definition, because it's not a practice treatment service designed to change a particular person's sexual orientation, right? In the definition, it's a person, singular.
Okay.
So whereas that's more teaching a broader group. That would be my argument. But it's vague enough. It's vague enough that I could imagine that a police officer who's not trained in constitutional law or not trained in statutory interpretation, a police officer hears a complaint and comes and investigates and says, yeah, that looks like it to me, and lays a criminal charge. And then it goes to a prosecutor, and the prosecutor perhaps is one who's, has a vendetta on this issue, and so files, proceeds with the prosecution. Even if you win and the judge finds you not guilty, your church and its reputation has been destroyed. You've probably been pilloried in the mainstream media, and frankly, the CRA might be investigating now because this person is facing a criminal complaint, and so now their charitable status is going to be investigated and possibly revoked, and so on and so forth. So, all of that would be brought to the fore in a situation like you've just described, and that's why at the committee stage we were proposing changes that would include clarifications that good faith teaching or discussion regarding conscientious beliefs or opinions, whether those are scientific or moral or religious, that's not conversion therapy. Like, let's be clear so that we don't have police officers, applying this in situations where it's not supposed to apply.
Okay. Given the fact that we're running short on time, I have so many things that I could ask you, and I'm sure you would love to talk about them. But how, as Christians, can we get involved on this issue? That is so much what ARPA Canada's mandate is about. What should we be thinking? How should ministers and biblical counselors, how should we be approaching the issue, and how can we engage our civil magistrate on this bill? And then maybe you can also tell us where, before you get into that, maybe give us an update. Where is the bill? How far along is it? And then how can we proceed to effectively make our voice heard when it's concerning this legislation?
So first of all, an encouragement. The encouragement is that the opposition to this bill actually has been really good, and we've seen non-Christians, we've seen secular groups. I mentioned a gay doctor has been outspoken. Secular doctors and counselors have spoken out against it. People across the spectrum have spoken out against it. Feminist groups are speaking out against it. So really encouraged by that. And I think people are rightly and winsomely engaging with a focused message that we can oppose a conversion therapy. We can promote and support a conversion therapy ban, just not this conversion therapy ban, because this one bans so much more than conversion therapy. And that message is ringing loud and clear with many members of Parliament. So right now, Bill C-6 is still in the House of Commons. It's awaiting its final vote in the House of Commons, which is called the vote on third reading, and that we're expecting to happen late March, but perhaps even later. So now is definitely the time to engage with your MP. And assuming Bill C-6 passes that third vote in the House of Commons, it's going to enter the Senate, and then we're going to be engaging with senators to try to get amendments to the definition there in the Senate. So definitely check out arpacanada.ca /C6. So arpacanada.ca /C6. And if you go there, we have our whole action page on this bill, and it will be updated as the bill proceeds through Parliament.
Awesome, man. Well, I am so thankful that you came on the program to discuss this. As I said, I could go all day, I'm sure. This is a very, very important bill that's before us. And as Christians, we're facing difficult times when it comes to COVID lockdowns, when it comes to so many things. But this, as we've kind of talked about, might make Christian conversion as it is, and the lordship of Christ over every area of our lives, something that could be criminally charged. And I mean, it's really, really dangerous, and that's why we wanted to have the program to encourage Christians to get actively involved in opposing this bill. And you can do that at ARPA Canada's website. What is it again? I know you just said it, but just so everybody's clear where they can go.
Yeah, so arpacanada.ca /C6. So ARPA is ARPA Canada.ca.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much, Andre, for coming on. God bless you in the work that you guys are doing with ARPA Canada. And I'm so thankful that you took the time out of your really, really crazy busy schedule to talk to us on the program. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Do you love listening to The Great Exchange? You can subscribe to our podcast on any one of these podcast platforms: Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts, and have 2 engaging episodes delivered to your mobile device each week. Our midweek message covers a myriad of topics and teaches us to look at them all through gospel glasses. And our Scripture Saturday episode is just that, an opportunity to study the Bible one passage of Scripture at a time. Miss an episode? Visit our website, thegreatexchange.ca, and you will find the complete back catalog of our episodes. And don't be shy, we love to hear from you, our listeners. Send us a message on Facebook or Instagram, or if you're not social media savvy, send us an email to thegreatexchangepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you all for joining in our ministry as we help you look at the world through gospel glasses.
What a wonderful conversation we were able to have with our faithful brother, André Schutten of ARPA Canada. That's the Association for Reformed Political Action Canada. Definitely check them out, as Andre mentioned a few times, arpacanada.ca. You can specifically engage on Bill C-6 at their website. So that's Bill C-6, an amendment to change the criminal code in Canada concerning conversion therapy. Definitely go over there. Definitely check it out. They have some wonderful resources that will help you understand the issue more in depth, and then also help you engage the appropriate political leaders in your area that you can bring to their attention just how dangerous, just how wicked this piece of legislation is, and how it not only comes at the expense of Canadians' most fundamental basic freedoms, but it also, as Andre has mentioned, stands to hurt the very people that the bill supposedly is trying to help. Perhaps as a Christian, you're thinking, well, maybe this is a good way to love our neighbor. Maybe this isn't the hill to die on. And to that, I say, you cannot be more wrong. You could not be more naive. We are to love our neighbors and want their flourishing. And to do that, we must be willing to preach the truth to them. We cannot take truth out into the streets and murder it for the sake of peace. As Christians, we have to preach the truth. We have to do it with love and compassion. Our words must be seasoned with salt, yet they must be true. And that comes when it is concerning the political sphere, and it comes in the context of how we deal with those that have sexual identity issues. We must preach the supremacy of Christ over all of life, and we must put Christ, every single person, whether heterosexual or homosexual, so-called, we all must place Christ on the throne of our hearts and allow him to dictate to us how we ought to live as image bearers of God, reflecting his image, the perfect image of the invisible. That is what this show is about. That is why we do monthly giveaways, so we can help you look at the world through gospel glasses. And when we consider false teaching, which is smuggled into this bill, false teaching concerning who God is, how he's spoken, false teaching concerning about who man is, anthropology, and false teaching concerning sexual ethics and gender identity. That's all in this bill. We spend so much time on the podcast talking about the good, the true, the beautiful as it accords to Scripture, that we might know when it comes before us, we might be able to discern what is true. We might be able to discern the truth from falsehood, the real from the counterfeit. And this bill puts forward a counterfeit religious viewpoint that would put into law dangerous things that we must be aware of. Right on brand with our monthly giveaway this month, we're giving away a resource called A Field Guide on False Teaching from Ligonier Ministries, which will help you apply gospel truths to real theological viewpoints and understand how to discern the truth from falsehood. We have a wonderful notebook, a tulip notebook that'll remind you of God's sovereignty over salvation as you're taking notes, whether it's sermon notes, whether it's prep for podcasts, or whatever you have going on. It is a great, beautiful resource and a helpful tool. And we also, given the pandemic and the lockdowns and the inhumanity of that whole situation, it's really important for us to know how to cope with isolation, or perhaps someone we know is experiencing real issues with their spiritual and mental health. We want to give you, as well as the notebook and the field guide to false teaching, a wonderful copy of the pamphlet, How to Battle Depression and Suicidal Thoughts, from Ray Comfort. So we're excited to give away that package of resources on the program for March 2021. You can definitely just go over to our Instagram, which is The Great Exchange Podcast over there, or facebook.com/The Great Exchange. To enter in, you just simply have to like, comment, false teachers on those Friday giveaway posts concerning this giveaway for March 2021. And each comment, you will get an entry in to win a wonderful resource. We will announce the winner at the end of the month. So thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you enjoyed the podcast. We hope you were edified by the content. Definitely go over to arpacanada.ca. Definitely check out some of those articles that we're going to link in the show notes that André made mention of. You definitely need to know what's going on concerning Bill C-6, and not to mention Bill C-7, which is unfortunately just passed, and it's an extension for MAID, medical assistance in dying, which is just a euphemism for euthanasia, which is just a euphemism for government mandated or government approved suicide. Let's just get that straight. So it's good that we're engaging on these discussions. We hope you really enjoyed this. We hope you'll use it as a resource and share it with others, that they might know the truth concerning Bill C-6 and how it stands to drastically affect Christian ministry and Christians living life Christianly. That's what we seek to do on this program. We hope you enjoyed the show. Share it with your friends. But as we say at the end of every episode, it is finished.